On the next Great Lake Now, we've been generating power with coal for over a century, and the ash that's left over can cause problems.
Coal ash has been contaminating groundwater on the shores of Lake Michigan here for over a decade.
Coal naturally contains lots of heavy metals.
But solutions are available.
We have an opportunity to do some really good things.
And more coal ash news with Northwestern University journalists who reported on the issue.
All right. Well, hello and welcome to the Great Lakes Now Facebook and YouTube live episode sneak peek watch party for August. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Anna Seisling, producer with Great Lakes Now, and I'm really excited to welcome our other co-hosts who are streaming this event tonight. Let's pull up that map graphic and I can list them off. All right. So we've got Detroit Public Television. We have WNMU TV, PBS in Marquette, Michigan, WQLN, Erie, Pennsylvania, PBS Western Reserve in Kent, Ohio, WPBS TV in Watertown, New York, Milwaukee PBS, and our most recent new cross-posting partner, WNIT Michiana PBS in South Bend, Indiana, our Great Lakes News collaborative partner, Circle of Blue, as well as special guest co-hosts for tonight's event, Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism and the Energy News Network. We are also streaming on our Great Lakes Now YouTube channel. All right, so we have a really great lineup of guests joining us a little bit later in the watch party, and they are going to answer all of your questions about coal ash, what it is and what it means in relation to our water systems, whether it is a private well or a municipal water system. And the episode for August is actually titled Poisonous Ponds, Tackling Toxic Coal Ash. And it's a really special episode for Great Lakes Now, as it was an opportunity to become a part of a really powerful kind of collaborative project. And our partners on this include the Energy News Network, along with the Chicago Investigative Project and the graduate program at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. So big shout out to both of those organizations and the wonderful and comprehensive reporting from those student journalists that helped to shape our stories for the August episode. And as always, I'm so honored and excited to have you along tuning in at home. And I'm excited to bring your voice into the conversation tonight. So if you're tuned in, let us know where you're watching from. If you have any questions about coal ash and what it means for your community's water supply, I'll be sure to work those in as we go. All right. So before we get into our guests and everything else, let's check out the catch from the latest episode of Great Lakes Now.
And now is time for The Catch, which takes you around the Great Lakes to hear from reporters about the issues they're covering. In this episode, we'll hear from Northwestern University student journalists about more of the stories in the project Poisonous Ponds, Tackling a Toxic Legacy.
In Dresden, New York, recent Medill journalism grad Shruti Gopalakrishnan has a story about a Bitcoin mining operation on the shores of Seneca Lake.
Greenwich Generation is a Bitcoin mining plant, which is actually housed in a former coal-fired plant, and when it was operating as a coal plant, it did provide a lot of electricity to the grid. And the story that I'm investigating concentrates on the coal ash that is left behind from its previous operation.
Some of the ash left over from the plant's days burning coal now sits in an unlined pond just a short distance from Seneca Lake. And some locals are concerned about water pollution.
So about 100 residents in the village of Dresden actually draw their water directly from Seneca Lake. They do not depend on any public water system. And one of the residents that I talked to said he's really too scared to just drink that water, so he goes through several cases of water bottles every month.
This fear is heightened by the fact that no government entity monitors or regulates these water sources, unlike municipal drinking water systems. In addition to the legacy contaminants on site, Shruti says the Bitcoin mining operation Greenwich Generation is emitting a lot of its own pollution too.
Greenwich Generation in particular calls itself green because they buy a lot of carbon credits to offset the environmental effects they're having, but in reality they're also contributing to a lot of kinds of pollution, especially in Seneca Lake, like air pollution, thermal pollution, and water pollution, and the state actually permits them to withdraw 139 million gallons of water each day from the lake, which they then release as warm water.
All of these factors have created tension between nearby residents who are concerned about their health and the health of the environment and Greenidge Generation. Neither Greenidge nor its attorneys responded to multiple requests for comment, and Shruti says New York officials have started to crack down.
On June 30th, the state of New York denied air permit renewals to Greenidge Generation, and environmentalists see this as a way to bring in more stringent laws when it comes to Bitcoin mining operations.
Medill journalism student Sarah I has been reporting on a former limestone quarry in Joliet, Illinois, about 30 miles from Lake Michigan. Owned by energy company NRG, the quarry holds more than 6 million tons of coal ash.
And that coal ash has been contaminating residents' private drinking water wells, which is where they get their drinking water. So environmental lawyers, activists, and residents are pushing for this coal ash to be completely removed from the quarry and transported to a safer landfill.
But whether that will happen remains to be seen. Recently, NRG has proposed capping the unlined quarry and leaving the ash where it is, a procedure known as closure in place. Some say that could contaminate nearby groundwater.
Because the particulate matter is so small and the chemicals are so small, it's very hard to see whether your water is actually contaminated. However, in our analysis of a lot of the energy companies' documents and submissions to the EPA, there were several exceedances of chemicals beyond EPA's safety health thresholds.
For some, these exceedances mean the coal ash should be removed from the site. But according to NRG spokesman Dave Schrader, closure in place provides both short and long-term protection to groundwater and surface water resources, along with ensuring overall protection to public health, welfare, and safety.
It's a battle that will continue in the coming months and in the coming years. So even though there are signs and glimmers of hope, there's definitely still work to be done on the ground.
Sarah says she was drawn to the story of Joliet because of its complexity.
I think it's really important to shine a light on the ways that energy companies have skirted EPA regulations and state regulations for years and years and years, and also the fight that environmental groups on the ground and residents and environmental lawyers have taken to these energy companies to try to find a solution and make a difference.
In Chicago, recent Medill journalism grad Diana Lean is one of several students who worked on a story that provides a national overview of the complications around coal ash regulation.
Coal ash has been produced during the coal burning process for many, many decades at the coal plants in the country, and it's been disposed of in the ground. Some of it has been scattered along land around the sites. For many years, there were little to no regulations or oversight, and that changed in 2015 when the EPA did establish some coal ash regulations.
The 2015 federal rule applies to existing and new coal ash sites, but it exempts landfills that have already closed.
So at the moment, there's a lot of coal ash in the ground that previously wasn't subject to regulations, still potentially might not be subject to regulations if it's some of that legacy ash, which is kind of up in the air regulatorily speaking. And companies' sites don't want to have to excavate all of this coal ash or undertake these massive cleanup efforts that cost a lot of money.
And while this ash sits in more than 700 impoundment lots around the country, there's a risk that the toxins will leach into groundwater, potentially impacting nearby residents' private wells, along with municipal water systems.
The EPA has indicated that they're going to take a more active approach going forward with the sites that are regulated under their current rules. And they indicated this in January when they released some denials of some extension requests from sites for when they would have to stop adding coal ash to unlined impoundments. So that was one of their first steps. And then on the state level, their own environmental agencies are approaching the coal ash issue in very different ways.
And this is where state and local watchdogs and community groups have been playing an important role.
And in certain cases as well, they've helped form new regulations that happened, for example, in Illinois, where environmental groups and residents gave input on new coal ash rules that came into effect in the state in 2021.
Other states with their own coal ash regulations include North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia, where there are existing requirements to excavate unlined impoundments of coal ash.
Then on the other hand, there's states such as Indiana where they're really just going to meet federal regulations, and that seems to be it for the time being. So it's a bit all over the place and a bit of a question, but there should be some action on the front within the next months and years.
At Great Lakes Now, we aim to cover the Great Lakes region and the people who live here, like you. Please follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and sign up for our newsletter at greatlakesnow.org.
Okay, so before we start unpacking everything that we just saw with our guests, I want to make sure that we do drop a link to the August landing page into the chat. There are tons of cool extras and links related to that segment, along with the other segments that are part of our latest episode and a part of this investigative series. I can't stress enough, really, really excellent reporting in this 12-part series. You're going to want to check that out, and all of it is on the Great Lakes Now website. Also, just a quick note that stations in Milwaukee, WCMU's area, Cleveland, Flint, Lima, Bowling Green, Ohio, and Youngtown, Ohio, have already aired this episode before the watch party. So if anybody is tuned in around there, just want to let you know that you can ask your questions now, and we will still be sure to work those in. And also, if the episode has not aired where you live, be sure to check your local listings for your PBS station in your community. And before we welcome our guests, really excited to see that we do have some people chiming in on our social channels, letting us know that they are tuned in. We have Deanna in Michigan City, Indiana, on the Great Lakes Now Facebook page. We have Peggy in Gary, Indiana. And shout out to our YouTube viewers. We have viewer BK, who is watching close to the Trenton coal plant downriver, and from GT Racer 347, who says hello from Green Bay. You can let me know where you are watching from. And of course, if you have any questions about coal ash and how it might be impacting your community's drinking water, feel free to drop those questions, comments, concerns into the chat, and I'll be sure to work those in as we go. All right, so now I'm really excited to welcome our guests. First up, we have Diana Lean, who is a journalist and recent Northwestern University graduate. Hi, Diana. So great to have you with us tonight.
Hi, great to be here.
And we also have Sarah I, who you also saw in that Catch piece. And Sarah is a student journalist also at Northwestern University. Hi, Sarah. Great to have you.
Hi, it's so good to be here.
And then we have Ken Paulman, who is editor of Energy News Network. Welcome, Ken.
Hi, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I want to start with Diana now. Diana, you talked a lot about some of the regulations, and then kind of behind the scenes, you and I have been chatting for the last month on and off. And I know that you've had your hand in several of these pieces that are part of this reporting series. So I'm going to ask you first to talk a little bit from your view as one of the students participating in it. How did this series come to be, and how did you all decide on coal ash? Or was this something that you were sort of told by professors you're going to be investigating, or was it like a collaborative kind of experience coming up with the idea?
Yeah, this project began in the early winter. Our professor, Carrie Leiterson at Northwestern University, told us about this idea to look into coal ash for our class, which is a group of less than 20 of us who spent months looking into this topic. And the story had a lot of potential. There was a lot of different topics to cover. Coal ash is something that affects all of the United States. These coal sites are scattered across the nation, and these issues keep posing similar health concerns and environmental concerns to all of these communities. So there was a lot of ground to cover, and when our professor brought this to us, we were all really eager and excited to begin looking into this story.
Mm-hmm. And you alluded to it a little bit just now, but for people who have absolutely no idea what coal ash is, hopefully if they watch that segment that we just showed a second ago, they have a little bit more of an idea. But I'm going to ask you to break it down in layman's terms. What is coal ash? Can you explain what it is? And in a couple sentences, why is it significant? Why should we care?
Coal ash is produced during the coal burning process. So the coal plants across the country produce coal ash. And this substance has been stored mostly in the ground in impoundments that are either ponds or landfills, or they've been scattered into the land around these sites.
Mhm.
And coal ash is important because this ash contains heavy metals such as arsenic and lithium and other toxic compounds as well. And when stored properly, these coal ash compounds should remain within the impoundment and shouldn't be affecting the local environment. But many of these impoundments are unlined, and federal regulations didn't come into effect until 2015. So these impoundments pose risks to waterways and groundwater when the toxic compounds leach through the soil or somehow are released into waterways. And then this can make its way into drinking water, which poses a line of health concerns, and it can also affect local wildlife such as fish.
So I'm going to ask you to go back a little bit and talk some more about that piece of regulation, because I thought it was really interesting. We saw these federal regulations come in, but talk a little bit more. You alluded to it some in the piece that we just saw, but what different states are doing and kind of the role of community organizations and activists. Talk a little bit about what is happening sort of nationally, but then also, what we're seeing in different areas that are kind of trying to figure out how to creatively deal with this issue.
So nationally speaking, the EPA created coal ash regulations in 2015 that apply to impoundments that have received the ash since 2015. So this wouldn't apply to any of the inactive impoundments that were closed before 2015 or ash that has been scattered into land. So how these different types of ash are addressed depends really on how states have addressed it. At a minimum, states have to meet EPA regulations, but other states have gone above and beyond. In the case of Illinois in 2021, the state created its own additional coal ash regulations that surpassed the level of regulations federally. This begins to cover the legacy ash, which is the older ash before 2015. On the other hand, just across the border in Indiana, there have been a few efforts by different politicians in the state to create new rules for coal ash, but none of these have taken off. And so at the moment in Indiana, the state is meeting EPA level regulations, which leaves legacy ash unregulated.
Okay, so we have a question coming in actually from Peggy on the Great Lakes Now Facebook page, and I'm going to put this one to you, Diana. So Peggy says, I'd like to know how to test for this in my water. Are water companies required to test for this and report their test results? And if coal ash is present, what can a consumer do to remove it? Will an RO system remove it? So, I mean, going back to what you said a second ago, it sounds like there are a lot of heavy metals. So I wonder, I mean, is it a matter of testing for all of those individually, or is there some way that all of these kind of, can be looked at and thought about from these water companies? What do you know about that?
There are ways that residents can test wells for the toxic compounds that are found in coal ash. From what I understand, I don't believe that water companies are routinely running these tests. So I think residents can do it privately, but I'm not sure what process would lead to their own water companies doing it. But the water can be tested for these compounds, and through previous cleanup efforts, communities have forced water companies to fund these testing efforts.
Okay, got it. Thank you. We also have Tim tuning in from Mansalona. And then we also have a question from a YouTube viewer, BK. BK is asking specifically about when is this plant in Trenton, Michigan officially closed? How contaminated could it be? I definitely don't expect you to just know offhand about different power plants around the Great Lakes, but I'm wondering, we also have some images that I think are just really striking to kind of let people understand just how close these plants and then also the coal ash ponds are to areas where people are recreating large bodies of water. So can you talk a little bit about, I guess maybe the level of variability that exists from these plants? Is it pretty safe to assume that all unlined coal ash ponds are going to be a problem leaching into the groundwater, or is there some variability based on your reporting, Diana?
Many of the coal plant sites seem to have indications of some of these compounds in the surrounding groundwater, because before 2015, there wasn't a standard federally that these sites had to be lined, that these impoundments had to be lined, and that's when there's really a risk for leaching into the groundwater. But what we found with our reporting is that these companies are required by the federal government to release certain documents that track the groundwater and release other data about their own monitoring of these compounds. So it is public information. They're required by the 2015 federal rule to release this information. So these documents would show if they, with their own reporting and well water testing, found any contamination. From what we've learned, it seems that many of these sites do have indications of some contamination, but it still can vary from site to site.
Got it. Okay. I'm watching the time tick away. So Diana, sit tight. I'm definitely going to bring you back in a little bit, but let's bring Sarah I into the conversation now. Sarah, of course, another student journalist at Northwestern University. And we have Katie watching from, she's on the Great Lakes Now Facebook page from Geneva, Ohio. And Sarah, I am just going to start with this question from a viewer, Daniel Marmer, who says, I remember like 10 years ago, one of the coal ash piles at Oak Creek Power Plant in Wisconsin collapsed into Lake Michigan. I never heard anything more about that incident. That's actually kind of a perfect comment to kick off our conversation, Sarah, because as I understand it, a lot of your reporting, there was this level of this kind of disconnect happening between what's going on with these coal ash impoundments and just some of the members of the community just having absolutely no idea what's going on. So talk a little bit about the stories that you worked on in the series and just kind of, what stood out to you while working on these pieces.
Yeah, for sure. And if I could speak to Daniel's comment, that's also kind of perfect because in Diana's piece, there is a paragraph about the Oak Creek incident. I think like a football field wide of coal ash spread out into Lake Michigan. And what a lot of our project is concerned with is the eroding shores of Lake Michigan, possibly erosion collapses like these happening again. So that's kind of a perfect segue. With my project in Joliet, Illinois, I focused a lot on a specific coal ash impoundment called Lincoln Stone Quarry. An environmental attorney I spoke to called Lincoln Stone Quarry really the poster child for this nationwide coal ash issue because of just how egregious this site is and how it continues to be unenforced and regulated by the EPA. Over 6 million tons of coal ash sit in this pit, and I was able to go down there to Joliet, which is about an hour away from Chicago, and speak to some residents. And most of the residents that I spoke to who lived less than a mile away from the coal ash impoundment had no idea that coal ash was even near them. And a lot of these residents were relying on private well water, which is what my piece is primarily concerned with, the fact that coal ash can be sitting in groundwater, possibly contaminating groundwater, and residents who rely on private wells for their drinking water are therefore possibly consuming all of these heavy metals that can be toxic to their health.
Okay. And for people who are interested in checking out Sarah's piece, and I'd highly recommend that you look at it. It's really interesting, full of so much investigative work and reporting. We're going to drop that link into the chat so you can check that out after the watch party. So talking just a bit about the investigative piece of this work, delving into company documents, you're looking at maps, you're looking at distances between, large bodies of water and these coal ash ponds. Can you talk a little bit, I guess, about the ways that doing this investigative work shaped your understanding of kind of the connection and role between energy companies, the ways that they are navigating these regulations related to coal ash? What is that looking like from your view?
Yeah, so the foundation of my story really came through looking at these documents that Energy, which is the company that operates Lincoln Stone Quarry, the documents that they had to submit to the EPA under federal regulations. So there were a lot of charts and maps that really mapped out exactly the toxic metals that were affecting the groundwater nearby in monitoring wells. In almost all of these wells, I found exceedances of toxic metals, and that is really what informed the concern around my reporting in the issue. And I feel like in terms of how energy companies navigate these regulations, many of these companies are aware of the contamination. They put it in their own reports and they submit it to the EPA. I think where the gap and the disconnect happens is the fact that EPA has barely actually enforced its own regulations. It's aware of these companies exceeding public safety health thresholds, But so far, they've been unable to really enforce closing these sites and really transporting them into safer areas.
Okay. So, Sarah, we have another question coming in from Peggy on the Great Lakes Now page. Peggy says, if I test my water for these metals, do I have to call out what I want the water tested for? I don't know what to ask for, heavy metals in general or a specific list. Can you help? So is there any place that the public can go to kind of get a definitive list of these metals that are found in coal ash if they are interested in trying to get their water tested?
So there are definitely some similar toxic metals associated with coal ash, but it really depends on the site that's nearest to your area. And what the regulations have helped with is definitely public awareness. All of these companies that I've talked about looking through and pulling charts and data from, they're under the law made public to residents and anyone who's looking on the internet. So what you can do is you can look up your nearest coal ash site. There's a lot of watch groups who have really dedicated websites to this. And then you can type in the name of that coal plant and then type in CCR documents. And under that, you should be able to look up groundwater monitoring reports. And that should give you the list of all of the toxic chemicals that could potentially be in your water.
Okay, Sarah, I really appreciate that. And finally, so, and I want to bring Diana back in for this one too. So, Sarah, in an email, you told me that the stories across the entire coal ash package had been unfolding for years, even decades. Recent development with the EPA has made coal ash as timely as it's ever been, but the battle is far from over. I want to put a question to both of you and ask, how do you see, based on your experience now reporting on this topic and really delving into it, how do you see this issue evolving as time goes on? Sarah, I'll start with you.
Yeah, as Diana has said, regulations have been in place federally since 2015. Many states are kind of using these federal regulations as guidelines to impose even more stringent measures. I think where the momentum is taking us is definitely towards enforcement. Now that a lot more residents are more aware of the issue and a lot more environmental groups are pushing for enforcement, I think the EPA is definitely paying attention. In January, they issued a set of denials that I think Diana can talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, to piggyback off of what Sarah was saying, there definitely seems to be a turning movement toward more enforcement. Environmental groups and activists for years have been throwing any method they could at increasing coal ash regulation through activism, but also through legal action and really through working with local politicians. The January denials that Sarah mentioned were issued by the EPA, the federal EPA, and this was for companies that had asked to extend how long they can continue to put coal ash in these unlined impoundments. And the EPA told a group of them that they would not be allowed to extend this deadline. This announcement was significant that the EPA said this because for years since the 2015 rules, the EPA has not taken a very active stance. So this indicates that they will be taking a more active stance in the years to come.
All right. Well, we will definitely be checking back in on this issue on Great Lakes Now. That's for sure. All right. So now finally, I'd like to bring in Ken Pahlman, who is editor of the Energy News Network, which also had a hand in putting together this series and kind of getting it out in front of the public and sharing it with people. So, Ken, this is a difficult but really important topic. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, as an editor, how you approach this reporting series from both a news and policy perspective. How did you think about these things, and then also how to make this accessible for people who are reading it?
Sure, yeah, and I came in fairly late into the process on this. So Carrie Liderson, Sarah mentioned, was kind of the leader on this project, and she's been a reporter for us for a very long time. So I came into this really as a reader, consuming all of these stories in more or less their finished states. And the thing that struck me about this is that it's a lot like, climate change itself. It's this big, really intractable problem, and there are bigger picture issues, but also every one of these sites is local and has specific local dynamics to it. And the other aspect to it too is that also like climate change, there are solutions, but there are also ways to implement these solutions that are mindful of who is impacted. And outside of these specific stories on the Great Lakes, we also have stories from Memphis, for example, and also from Georgia, where it is poor communities, specifically Black and Brown communities, that are bearing the brunt of the trucking and the dumping from the actual cleanup operations. So I think from a policy perspective, to the extent that we would speak to that, is that there are equitable ways to deal with this and there are inequitable ways to deal with this, and I think we're seeing examples of both.
Ken, I'm so grateful to you for bringing up the kind of equity and just blatantly the systemic racism that is a piece of this, and thinking about this as kind of an intersectional issue. So I'm wondering, from your perspective personally, did you have a good amount of background knowledge about coal ash before this project?
Well, what's funny is, so I was really struck in Diana. I'm sorry, was Diana did the Joliet story? I'm going to get this wrong. Sarah, sorry, I apologize. Where she noticed that folks living near this coal ash impoundment didn't even realize it was there. And I actually grew up 2 miles from a major coal plant in western Nebraska, and in the 1980s, and we could observe air pollution, we could see coal dust, especially when it snowed, but no one really gave much of a thought to the ash itself. We didn't know it was harmful. We had private wells that weren't tested, so we would have no way of knowing if this impacted us. I guess I'll find out eventually. And from a news standpoint, it is something that we cover from time to time. But again, it's hard to sort of convey the urgency around a landfill full of waste product that, even under the best circumstance, would take years and years and years to mitigate. And so from a news standpoint, it's always like, okay, well, what's new, what's interesting, how can we attract people's attention to this? It's a real challenge, and I think these student reporters did a fantastic job of making it current and relevant.
Absolutely. And I want to bring both of the student reporters that are with us tonight back into the conversation. But first, I just want to say that we dropped a link to Energy News Network website in the chat. So if you are not familiar with the Energy News Network, you can be sure to check them out in the chat. All right. So Ken, I'm going to ask you kind of a final question, and then we'll close things out with Sarah and Diana here. But I'm wondering, I mean, you've been in this industry now, working in the news biz for a long time. What is your hope that the students took away from this project? From my view, I was really blown away by just kind of the breadth and depth of this series. And that's something that, quite frankly, I'm not sure I learned in journalism school. So I was really impressed by that. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the student piece of this.
Yeah, and again, they all did a fantastic job. I was really struck by the attention to detail, because this is incredibly complex, incredibly nuanced, and frankly, it's not super interesting sometimes. And so as a journalist, to be able to maintain your own curiosity and your own passion about a topic, even if it's not on the face of it really exciting, that's really critical if you're going to have your readers be interested in it as well. And I think that's something that we really, I don't want to say we, because I had very little to do with it, that this group pulled off really well.
Got it. All right. We have Rebecca on the Great Lakes Now Facebook page who says, thank you for this opportunity to learn more. Rebecca, you are welcome. I'm so thankful that we were able to have 3 really wonderful guests to talk more about this really important topic. So now, Diana, I want to put it to you. I feel like both you and Sarah really worked on and thought about so many different facets of this issue over the course of this reporting series. What stood out to you most, whether it was something that was really surprising that you came across in your reporting, or some element, I guess, of journalism and of piecing this story together? What do you think is going to be your main takeaway from the Poisonous Ponds project?
I think my main takeaway is, when we began looking into this project back in the winter, coal ash was a new topic to me. I didn't understand much about it. And from when I began looking into it, I saw it as mostly an environmental issue affecting the immediate land around. And I, through reporting, found that there are so many layers to this story, looking at local communities. And for example, in Waukegan, Illinois, there's a lot of environmental racism and environmental justice issues. There's a decades-long history of industry and of cleanup efforts for messes left behind by companies. Across the different sites that we looked at, there are just so many stories of how people have been affected, how the environment has been affected, how this has affected the communities economically. And so really, coal ash is the tip of a lot of stories. It's an entry point to how these communities are being affected by industry and how industry will take care of these environmental threats in the years to come.
Got it. Sarah, what about you? I wonder what your biggest takeaway has been from the Poisonous Ponds project.
Yeah, I think other than the collaboration in our newsroom, I feel like that really helped me as an undergraduate student find my footing in this project. Kind of what Ken touched on, how at every level of this coal ash issue, there is a story to be found there, from barges bringing coal ash from Puerto Rico to the United States, to coal ash sitting in unlined pits like Lincoln Stone Quarry, to trucking to safer landfills, quote unquote, but also those potentially impacting disproportionately impacted communities. I feel like discovering that every single layer of this issue is worth covering was definitely really eye-opening.
I really appreciate it. It is that time to wrap up another edition of the Great Lakes Now episode sneak peek watch party. And even though you already got to see the catch segment, there are two other really great stories in the August episode. One about coal ash and communities, and another about potential beneficial reuse of coal ash. I hope you will check them out on your local PBS station or on YouTube. And again, we'll be sure to drop the link to the landing page that has access to the segments for the show. It has a map. It has really incredible additional reporting that was a part of the Poisonous Ponds Tackling Toxic Coal Ash project. And I'm already so excited for next month, and I hope that you are too. A big thank you to my guests today. Let's bring them back on the screen. All right, so we have Diana Lean, who is a journalist and a recent graduate from Northwestern University. Diana, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great being here.
And we have Sarah I, who is a student journalist at Northwestern University. Sarah, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciated your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And we had Ken Pahlman, the humble editor of Energy News Network. Ken, great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And a big thank you to our co-host for this watch party. Let's pull that map graphic back up. We have Detroit Public Television. We have WNMU TV PBS in Marquette, Michigan. We have WQLN in Erie, Pennsylvania. PBS Western Reserve in Kent, Ohio. WPBS TV in Watertown, New York. Milwaukee PBS. Our most recent new cross-posting partner, WNIT Michiana PBS in South Bend, Indiana. And our Great Lakes News Collaborative partner, Circle of Blue, along with special guest co-hosts for tonight's event, Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism and Energy News Network. We've also been streaming on our Great Lakes Now YouTube channel. All right. And also, I want to extend a lot of warm gratitude and thanks to our wonderful team at Detroit Public Television, Tammy Winsell, Sandra Svoboda, Colleen O'Donnell, Mila Murray, Jordan Wingrove, Rob Green, and Lana Contardi. All right. Thank you so much for another fun Great Lakes Now watch party. Until next time, we'll see you out on the lakes.